My name is Jaap Wesselius. I work for Inovativ UC, that's a company on the other side of the street. And my main focus is on UC, Exchange and Link, but I happen to do something with Hyper-V as well.
Good morning everyone. My name is Noorderijk. Currently I'm working for a PQR company in the Netherlands. But from the 1st of February I start my own company together with Imara ICT. And we will deliver consultancy on Exchange, Link, Office 365, Hyper-V and System Center. That's our main focus. We can do stuff around that subjects, but we will mainly focus on that products. And for today, I will deliver the keynote together with Jaap Wesselius.
This is my first keynote. And a keynote means we have 55 dull slides, no demos and stuff, just some history and future and about the presentation for today. Hyper-V.NU. I was the founder of Hyper-V.NU in 2008. And accidentally I ran into the RDP program in those days, the Rapid Deployment Program. Hyper-V was new. We had a virtual server, which was a nice product, but not really for production environments. So I ran into this program and I figured, how about the user community? So I founded Hyper-V.NU, and in the early days, I guess within 2 or 3 months, Hans Vredevoort joined me on the community. And the first meeting we had was on September the 3rd in 2008. And Hans did a session, Ronald Bekelaar did a session, and they have sessions today as well. It was a new product, so we had full house, was fully booked. We have had other sessions at HP, Nobel, Microsoft, here and in, hoe heet het daarachter? Barneveld. Yeah. In the past. And you see that when new versions are coming or a service pack with new technology is coming, there's quite a lot of interest in these sessions. Last year we did some reorganization on Hyper-V.NU, and we were a bit struggling. We had some interesting content, but it was distributed. Hans did some stuff, I did some stuff. We had a couple of people, Peter Noorderijk and Maarten Wijsman, who wanted to add some stuff as well. So we set up a new website. It has the same look and feel. We reorganized everything. We made quite a lot of noise in the market using Twitter and blog and stuff, whatever, and to get new people, to attract new people. So we have had 120,000 visits in 10 months' time. We had 69,000 unique visitors, and we have over 300,000 page views. And today's event, over 100 visitors. We opened the pages, and it was filled up within 2 days, which is extremely fast. And even the last week we had people saying, okay, maybe there's some more spaces around, maybe. I'm sorry. A special thanks to our sponsors, who are sponsoring us by giving us time to work for Hyper-V.NU, giving us virtual machines for testing, hardware, network bandwidth, and we also have some ads on the website from Altaro and Veeam. Special thanks to our sponsors. Today's agenda is the keynote. This is almost my last slide, so I hand it over to Peter. We have the keynote, Aidan Finn, who is going to talk about the networking in Hyper-V, Windows Server 8. Hans Vredevoort, after lunch, will talk about the new storage options. We have Ronald Bekelaar talking about Windows DDDD. Who knows what DDDD stands for?
No.
It's not demo. Demo.
Something with data duplication.
Hier hoor ik wat.
Something with data duplication.
Deep dive.
Deep dive. And Maarten Wijsman, who is going to talk about VMM 2012, and Robert Bakker, who just left, is going to do the closing keynote this afternoon, and then we have some drinks. And of course, this event, special thanks to Microsoft for giving us the opportunity to do a presentation here, to give all the stuff, etc. I'm going to hand over to Peter. Good luck.
Thank you. For me, this is also my first keynote, and it's also the first time I need to do it in English. So I'm a little bit nervous, and I'm feeling like Paul Turner, who's trying to speak some Dutch. So sorry if I speak some steenkolen English. But I will try to do my best for today. In the original program, we have 1 hour for the keynote, but Aiden asked me kindly to keep the time short so he can get any extra time for his presentation to go further into details of the networking stuff in Windows Server 8. So, first of all, we're going to look to the Microsoft Virtualization facts, where we come from. In February 2003, Microsoft acquired Connectix and acquired a virtual PC from Connectix. And that was the first step from Microsoft in the virtual machine market. And from that time, Microsoft started improving this product to Virtual PC 2004, and after that came Virtual Server 2005 and Virtual Server 2005 R2. Virtual PC was a program for the desktop, and Virtual Server was a virtual machine program which was suitable to install on a server operating system. The Virtual Server 2005 and R2 are so-called Type 2 hypervisor. And this means that the virtual machine software is not installed directly on the hardware. There is an operating system between the virtual machine software and the hardware layer. And therefore you pay some performance penalties, and the virtual machine software was dependent on the operating system. A funny fact is that in 2006 I met a VMware training, and in that training we were with 6 guys, and we do an introduction. And one of the first guys introduced himself as Hans Vredevoort. And he said, actually I did not have any experience with VMware ASX. We are only using Virtual Server. And at that moment I started laughing. I said, hey Hans, did you make a joke? Did you really use Virtual Server in the data center? He said yes. And believe me, he said this will be a great product in the future. It will even be greater than the product you are using right now. And at that moment, I did not believe him. But a couple of years later, actually in 2009, I think, well, Hans is going to be right. So, October the 1st, we get Hyper-V Server 2008. It was the first real hypervisor of Microsoft. It was a Type 1 hypervisor. So the hypervisor is installed directly on the hardware. And a lot of people say, hey, it's a copy of VMware ESX, but definitely it's not, because it has a complete other architecture. Hyper-V has a micro-kernelized hypervisor architecture. This means that the hypervisor is divided into 3 rings, ring -1, ring 0, and ring 3. And the good thing, and the thing I like about that architecture, is that the WMI component is running in ring 3 in user mode of the operating system. And that means that if we need to give third-party vendors access to the hypervisor, we do not need to give them access to ring -1 or ring 0, the kernel components of Hyper-V. So we only need to give them access to ring 3 user mode, and if they break something, it does not have such impact if it was in the kernel mode. But there were also some limitations in Hyper-V Server 2008. We cannot do a live migration. We only have a quick migration. Another limitation was that we can place only 1 virtual machine per LAN. So in the data centers, that was a really hard to configure, and it was a limitation for your storage environment. So in Hyper-V Server 2008 R2, there are some really big improvements. First of all, we have live migration. Live migration does allow us to migrate a virtual machine from one host to another host within the same cluster without any downtime. Another new feature was cluster shared volumes. And with cluster shared volumes, it was possible to place more VMs on one LAN. Personally, I think cluster shared volume can use some improvements. It's mainly because of I/O redirection. It's a cool feature when you have an environment and your connection to your storage, iSCSI or your fiber channel HBA will break down and there will be I/O redirection over your network interface. But it's not cool if it happens during a backup and it will not go back in normal mode, so when it stays in redirection mode. And I've seen it a lot, that it stays in redirection mode throughout the day. So users complaining that that virtual environment was not performing very well. And when you go take a look at the Hyper-V environment, you see that all I/O traffic is running through your network interfaces. And the only thing we can solve that was a reboot of the Hyper-V host. In Windows Server 8, that will change. Hans will tell something about that, I guess. Yeah. In February 2011, we have Service Pack 1 for Hyper-V. And this was a real important service pack because it closed the gap with the competitors on the VM density per host. Other competitors have memory management techniques which make it possible to place more virtual machines per host than memory actually allowed. With dynamic memory, we can set a startup RAM and a maximum RAM, and only the startup RAM will be reserved by the hypervisor, and by that technique it's possible to place more VMs on a host than in the static situation. Another improvement was RemoteFX, and that was needed for VDI environments. So with that two improvements, there are companies in the world who are doing research in the virtualization market who say, hey, Microsoft is now one of the leaders in the virtualization market. It has the features to be an enterprise-ready product, and it has the features to be implemented in the data center. I hope, this is a picture from Gartner, that Gartner can scale out this graph. Because with the next release of Windows Server 8, I think Microsoft will be far behind this picture. And then, this year, Hyper-V in Server 8. I don't know when it will be RTM or when the next beta will come out. But one thing is true, I think that Hyper-V Server 8 will be one of the most big changes in the Windows Server operating system since Windows Server 2000. With Windows Server 2000 we came from NT4 and we were transferred to 2000, a complete new interface, new graphical user interface, web style folders and stuff like that, new graphical user management tools. And with Windows Server 8 that will also be the fact. The first time I saw Windows Server 8 and tried to play with it, I couldn't find my control panel, I couldn't find Hyper-V Server Manager. It was a really hard to find out where I need to configure things. That's because of the Metro style, which is introduced in Windows Server 8. But luckily, we also have our classic desktop, and with the classic desktop, I can come around in this product. But there will be a lot of new features in this new operating system. One thing I would say, it's still a developer preview. And because it's a developer preview, it's possible that in the RTM version there are less features than in the developer preview. And it's also possible that things in the developer preview does not work well at this moment. And what we see in the testing environment of Hyper-V.NU is that some things need to be done through PowerShell. When you try to do it in the graphical user interface, you get an error. Did you exactly the same in PowerShell, it's gonna be well. So it's a warning. And also for the demonstrations which are given today, it's possible that the demo, who has been tested and tested and tested all over, will not work because of it's in developer preview. I will do a demo of Hyper-V Replica, and I've tested over 10 times. And last night 2 o'clock was the last time, because last evening at 10 o'clock it fails 3 times after each other. So I hope it's gonna work. I will do my best. Let's take a look at the new features. In Windows Server 2008, Microsoft introduced Windows Server Core OS. This means that when you install Windows Server, you've got the choice between a core installation or a full installation. The full installation is the installation which we all know with the graphical user interface, and the core installation is a command line based version of Windows Server. In my opinion, for critical workloads, and Hyper-V is a critical workload, you need to install the core version of the operating system. Because it's more secure. It's reliable, more reliable than the graphical user interface version, and it's faster than the graphical user interface version. I have tested, and I have wrote some blogs about it on Hyper-V.NU, and we see that Server Core is performing better. For consultants or people doing a lot of implementation, the command line can be handled. It's sometimes hard to configure network teaming or network bindings or stuff like that. But with the help of the user community, TechNet blogs and so on, you can figure it out. But for the daily administrator, the Windows Server Core is hard to administer. And there are some tools which will help you, like Server Core Configurator and a tool from Codeplex and so on, which will help you to configure the Core OS, but it's still hard to use it. And that's one of the reasons why the administrators say we do not like the core version, give us the graphical user interface version. So you take some risk on security, reliability and performance. In Windows Server 8 you can install the core version and start with the core version and configure things you need to do from out the command line. And when it becomes hard and you need a graphical user interface, you can put the graphical user interface on. So you can switch it on. And after you are ready with configuring your NIC teaming or something like that, you can put it off again. So at the moment you put it off, the code is not running anymore. So when you are looking for Windows updates, when the graphical user interface is off, updates needed for the graphical user part will not be detected. They only will be detected if you are the graphical user interface on. So I think for Windows Server 8 there is no reason anymore to install the graphical user interface. Another new feature is Hyper-V Replica. With Hyper-V Replica, it's possible to create a replica of a running virtual machine to another Hyper-V host. In the previous versions of Hyper-V, it was needed to buy expensive Sun solution, replication software, and you need to configure the replication of your storage environment on your storage system. For a lot of mid-sized and small-medium business, it was too expensive to have to deal with such situations. So they decided to not configure a disaster recovery location. But in Windows Server 8, Hyper-V Replica can be done without the need for shared storage infrastructure, without the need for an Hyper-V cluster environment. you can create an Hyper-V replica of a virtual machine through a node in the same cluster, but also to a node in another cluster, or to a node in another data center which is not part of your own data center. So you can create a disaster recovery site at your service provider, for example, and create a Hyper-V replica of your virtual machine to that service provider. And that can be your disaster recovery site. So let's hope that it will work, and let's take a look at the demo. Hello. Why? Sorry?
Restart the tools.
Which tool? You mean the...
Remote desktop. And get a connection.
No, that works. Okay, I'll go here, switch to that. Yeah, in the remote desktop connection, we have some troubles with that.
If you go to the bottom, maybe you can do. Yeah, you can go down in the control panel, and then go to the other options. More settings. And then you can go to the desktop control panel.
Ah, yeah. Okay, thank you.
So work around.
You said something about searching the options?
Okay, first of all, we need to configure the host for the Hyper-V replica. So we go into the Hyper-V settings, and there is a part replication configuration. And here you had to enable the computer as a replica server. This means that the server can receive virtual machine replicas. And when you enable that, you have two options. You can use integrated Windows authentication, or you can use certificate-based authentication. When you would like to replicate your virtual machine to another host within the same domain, it's the best practice to use the integrated Windows authentication. But when you need to use your virtual machine to a host with this not in the same domain, you should use certificate-based authentication and use a certificate to authenticate to the server to which you would like to replicate your virtual machine. Then we need to specify from which we allow replicas. Is that from any other host, or is it just from the host we specified? And as we can see on Windows Server 8, Server 2, I have configured that only Win8 Server 1 may send a replica to Node 2. So that's the configuration needed on the host. And that's only what you need to configure. Be aware that the firewall on another host must allow HTTP traffic, and that there is enough space to place the replica. After that, we go to the virtual machine, and we click Enable Replication, and then the Enable Replication wizard will start. We go to Next, and we specify the replica server to which we will replicate the virtual machine, and verify configuration. It detects the authentication mechanism that is selected in the Hyper-V host configuration. If you have more than one VHD, you can select the VHDs which you would like to replicate. In this case, we only have just one, so we select that. The next thing is that we can configure recovery history. If you have some recovery points, then you can also replicate those recovery points to the other host. The next thing is that if you have a bandwidth connection between the two hosts, which will not allow you to create a replica or completely fill up the bandwidth, then it's possible to make an initial replication to an external media. And then you can bring over that external storage to your second data center, plug it into your Hyper-V host, start a wizard, and implement this initial replication. And when that is implemented, you can start a new replication, and the changes will be replicated to the host. So I will do an initial copy over the network. Click Finish. And we see that the initial replication is running right now. So this is the only thing I need to do for a replica. And this will allow me to create a very easy disaster recovery site for my virtual machines. And it's a hot replica on server 2. So any changes in my primary virtual machine will be replicated to the secondary server. Hyper-V Replica makes use of the VSS snapshot provider, so it's also application aware. So if you have tools like Exchange Server or SQL Server, it can make use of the VSS snapshot providers, which will allow to make a replica of service with that program. As you can see, the virtual machine is already created. What is done right now is the copy of the VHDX file to the second host. Let's go on to another new feature. I will not go into details because Aiden will do that. But I think that we all agree that NIC teaming in Windows Server 2008 R2 and Hyper-V.NU was not that good. If we talk about the good, the bad and ugly, NIC teaming wasn't ugly because it is not supported from Microsoft itself. For support of NIC teaming, we need to go to our third-party vendor. And only with that support we can implement NIC teaming. Then there was another challenge when we built a Hyper-V server right now and we teamed some network interface cards. And after a while we need some extra network interface cards and we cannot get the same as we already had in our host. We cannot team them in one configuration. That's because of the different models and the different drivers we need for it. So, on the first hand, it was not supported, and on the other hand, it was also sometimes hard to configure when we would enable VLANs on a NIC team. Then we need to set it up on another way for an HP environment than for an Intel environment. And if you have Cisco switches behind your Hyper-V service, you need to do some extra configuration. There was no one guideline to configure NIC teaming. Every situation needs another configuration. And especially for passing through VLANs, it was sometimes hard to configure. In Windows Server 8, third-party vendor support is not needed anymore because NIC teaming is part of the Windows Server 8 OS itself. So NIC teaming is built in the OS. And we can team up to 32 adapters within one NIC team. And that could be adapters of all different vendors. We can team an Intel with a Broadcom, with a NAC, or so on, all into one team. And it's a standard feature of Windows Server 8. Another thing is that we get extensible switches in Hyper-V. This means that there is an extensible available for companies like HP or Cisco, and they can use their firmware and their OS for the switches on our virtual switches. So it's an extensible V switch, and the Cisco iOS can be used for configuring the virtual switch also. Beside of this, the switch has also some improvements in security. It's possible to create ACLs on the ports to allow traffic between the switch ports or disallow traffic between the switch ports. Live migration is improved. This means that in Hyper-V.NU we can do only a single live migration at a time. If we would like to live migrate 10 virtual machines, we have to do it after each other. In Windows Server 8 we can run multiple live migrations at once. And the amount of virtual machines which you would like to migrate is unlimited. The only limitation is the bandwidth between the Hyper-V hosts. You have to realize that when you start live migration of 20 or 25 virtual machines, that it will use your network connection to live migrate. And if you use your the same network for virtual machine connections as for live migration, then your end users will see that. So also in Windows Server 8 it's the best practice to use a dedicated network for live migration. But we can do more live migrations at one time. In Hyper-V.NU it was needed to have a shared storage infrastructure to perform a live migration. Only with a SAN solution we can do a live migration. In Windows Server 8 it's not needed anymore. We do not need a shared storage infrastructure to perform a live migration. You can live migrate a virtual machine which is on local storage to another server which also only have local storage. And this makes it very interesting for companies like in the small and mid-sized business who will not invest in expensive storage solutions. And it's also possible to live migrate a virtual machine or the storage of a virtual machine to a file server share. Beside of live migration, we have live storage migration in Hyper-V Server 8. So it's also possible to migrate the storage of a virtual machine without any downtime to another host or to a file server. Who have ever tried to make a snapshot or make a clone of a domain controller in Hyper-V.NU? Okay, I see some. Making a snapshot or making a clone is not that hard. But did you also restore the snapshot? Okay, then comes the problem. When you restore a snapshot or when you restore a clone of a domain controller which is virtualized, in Windows Server 2008 R2, you had a great chance that there will be a USN rollback. And after a USN rollback, there will be replication problems between domain controllers because of the version of the Active Directory database does not it's not anymore the same on the domain controllers. So it was not possible to restore a clone or a snapshot in Hyper-V.NU of a domain controller. And that was one of the reasons why you need to install a backup agent inside a domain controller if you would like to make a consistent backup of your Active Directory and if you also would restore that backup. In Windows Server 8 we can create virtualization aware domain controllers. If you create a Windows Server 8 domain controller on a Hyper-V3 server, the domain controller knows, it understands that it's virtualized. And this will give us the possibility to create a snapshot of a virtual domain controller. It will also give us the possibility to create a clone of a domain controller or a Hyper-V replica of a domain controller. And when we revert the snapshot, or when we will do a clone of a domain controller, the domain controller knows what to do to prevent a USN rollback. It understands that it's virtualized, and it understands that there will be a restore of an earlier database version, and it will correct it with the other domain controller in your Active Directory site by himself. So domain controllers can be virtualized in Windows Server 8, and they also can be replicated to your disaster recovery site without any problems.
Is that for any domain controller, or does it have to be a Windows Server 8?
Yeah, it has to be a Windows Server 8 domain controller.
Okay.
And only that domain controller has also the function to create
Okay.
DC clone.
Will the snapshot be updated, or is it just the mechanism it knows it is virtualized?
No, it's the mechanism that from Active Directory that it knows that the USN rollback needs to be correct. Okay, some scalability. In Hyper-V.NU we support 160 cores per host, 2 terabyte of RAM, and 4,000 VMs within a cluster. In 2008 R2, the limitation was 1,000 VMs in a cluster. And a couple of months ago, I had a situation where I need to design an environment for 5,000 VDI workstations. And in that situation, I ran into the problem of the limitation of 1,000 VMs in a cluster. And also the limitation of 16 nodes within a cluster, because that's also a limitation of the current version. We cannot have more than 16 nodes in a cluster. In Server 8, we can have up to 63 nodes per cluster. I know it's not a logical number, but there is a story behind, and I cannot share that with you at this moment, but there is a reason why it's not 64. There's also some improvement on VM scalability. We can have up to 32 virtual CPUs and 512 gigabyte of RAM. And maybe as you noticed when I'm doing the Hyper-V replica, you see that there was a VHDX instead of a VHD. There is a new format for virtual hard disks, and it's called VHDX. And VHD has the limitation of 2 terabyte per volume, per VHD. And with VHDX, it's 16 terabyte. We support virtual fiber channels in Windows Server 8. This means that you can create a virtual HBA in your virtual machine and can connect to fiber channel HBA SAN. This means that it's also possible to create a cluster, an application cluster within your virtual machines with the use of a virtual fiber channel. I was listening to the Build conference keynote, and while I was doing that, I have primary focus on my Outlook screen. I was sending some mail. But on the background, I hear the presenter talking about a really cool new feature named Cow. I thought, Cow, what will that be? So I immediately switched to the Build presentation, and I was very curious what they mean with cow, because I think on a cow like you see here. But that was my limitation of English. It was not cow, it was cow. Do I pronounce it right, Ian? Yeah? Thank you. Cow stands for Cluster Aware Updating Wizard. And this means that there will be an orchestrated fashion to update your Hyper-V cluster. If you have a Hyper-V cluster with a couple of nodes and you would like to apply updates, then you can use the Cluster Aware Updating Wizard to orchestrate the whole process of updating. Cluster Aware Updating Wizard is part of the failover clustering feature, and it's you can run it from your Server Manager tools. there's only one limitation. You cannot patch or update the host from which you were running the wizard itself. So it's also available in the remote server administration tools. So install it over there and start the wizard over there and patch your Hyper-V host from the remote server administration tools. What it will do, it will download the necessary updates. It will first do a scan of your Hyper-V hosts, which updates are needed. Then it will download them. Then it will automatically initiate a live migration of the virtual machines which are running on the host to another host. And it will patch the host, reboot it if necessary, bring it back online, and move back the virtual machines to the host which is patched, and then the second node will be patched. It's a completely automated process with no intervention needed anymore. And there are also some third-party plugins available which will help you to patch the firmware of your HBAs, for example. So Microsoft made an extensible available for cluster-aware updating and give it to HP or other companies. Well, I know it's one of the most updates we get on our system, but I hope that you do not install Adobe on your Hyper-V host.
No.
Okay. But there will be an extensible available for third-party vendors, and they can write down their code to make use of the cluster-aware updating feature.
Is there a way that we can interact with the live migration process? Tell you, hey, I don't want to move it to node number 2, but I want to node number 3 and 4?
Yeah, I think that's by default possible for your live migration settings. You can configure the properties of a virtual machine with a preferred owner, or you can also configure it that it must not be migrated to host A, B, or C. So the cluster-aware updating wizard knows from that setting, and therefore it will migrate the virtual machine to the host.
Okay, that's the only setting I can, or that's the setting I should use when I...
Well, the extensible is also available for PowerShell command lines. So you can create your own PowerShell script to move the virtual machines to the host you want. And you can make cluster-aware updating wizard that configure the cluster-aware updating wizard to make use of the PowerShell script instead of the built-in feature from Hyper-V itself.
That's good. Great. Thanks.
Does Cow integrate with the WSS
Yeah.
and the SSCM?
Yeah, it does integrate with WSUS, with Windows updates, with Microsoft updates, with System Center Configuration Manager, and also with third-party update mechanisms. So,
Not the current version of VMM yet.
sorry?
Not the current version of VMM.
No, VMM 2012.
The next version.
Yeah, yeah,
The next.
VNext version, okay. Yeah.
VD next.
Are there any more questions?
There's a very similar functions updating process in the VMM 2012. Could you elaborate on the differences?
Okay, sorry, could you repeat the question?
The update process of the cluster-aware updating process itself, there's a very similar functionality in the new virtual machine manager to do a cluster-aware update. Is there any other functionality I get when using the virtual machine manager besides doing just the normal cluster validation updates?
Well, when you start the virtual machine, when you start the updates from our virtual machine manager, then you can use cluster-aware updating wizard. So that can integrate with each other, but you have to configure it manually. I don't know the details about that, but it's possible. It's not true that VMM automatically use cluster-aware updating wizard as a mechanism for updating it.
Okay.
And the difference is that in Virtual Machine Manager it's not a completely orchestrated process. And cluster-aware updating wizard is completely automated and orchestrated. Does that answer your question?
Yes, Gary, my opinion was that in the virtual machine manager, customer may say whether it is a fully automated process. in 2012. It's a cluster aware.
Yeah, but it,
In
yeah, that's true, but that was implemented before Windows Server 8 was available, and it does not. I think it will not understand that you're dealing with a cluster.
It does.
It does?
It does.
Okay.
In VMM or
In VMM.
VMM
Does VMM know that we have to deal with a cluster and
VMM
that?
understands the cluster. It does an automatic live migration as well.
Yeah, okay, but did it also when we need to upgrade the firmware of our HBA?
No.
No, okay. And that's the difference.
All right.
The cluster aware updating wizard is also aware when we upgrade our firmware of our HBAs or when we update the driver of our network interface cards. Carsten.
Peter, the VMM will also work with the Hyper-V.NU product, so with the Windows 2008 R2 cluster. And the feature you introduced is only Windows 8.
Yeah.
Only Windows 8 feature.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Because of the time, we will switch to our next presentation. Thank you for your attention. Enjoy today, and I would like to welcome Aidan Finn.